So in regards to circumcision and where that comes into the picture, you got to think, why is the Apostle Paul only one talking about circumcision so much?
He's the only one? I thought there were other apostles at the meetings.
No, I'm saying why in his epistles, why is he the only one talking about circumcision so much?
Well, he probably came up against the people more often that were teaching about it.
Now, I'm just trying to help you think, why did he come up against those people more? Why was that more of a always reoccurring theme with the Apostle Paul and his ministry?
Well, he was probably at the forefront for most of the conversion of Gentile nations. I mean, he was the guy in Athens, right?
Right. So you hit it on the head in regards to he was an apostle to who? The Gentiles, right? So it was a big thing. Now, the reason the circumcision, the Jews didn't have to worry about the circumcision because according to Torah, they would get circumcised on the 8th day, right? So that wasn't a big thing for the Jews. The problem was the believing Jews, meaning the Jews that believed in Jesus, they had this halakhic process of circumcision. So circumcision became a shorthand term, if you look into the etymology of it, for that whole process. So if a Gentile wanted to become Jewish, that Gentile would first have to receive oral Torah and written Torah, both Torahs, okay? And oral Torah was a yoke that was a very, very tough yoke. Even the apostles talk about how tough that yoke was. So you had these two. That was the first thing they had to do, was accept both oral Torah and written Torah. As a matter of fact, just as a side note, there was a Gentile. It was a little bit before the time of Jesus. There was a Gentile. He went to Rabbi Shammai, and he was like, "How many Torahs do you have?" And Rabbi Shammai, he said, "We got two, the oral Torah and the written Torah." And the Gentile said, "Look, I only want to learn the written Torah. I don't want to learn the oral Torah." And Rabbi Shammai, he got really, really mad and started throwing stuff at him, and he ran him out the school. And then that same Gentile, he went to the University of Hillel. He went to Rabbi Hillel, and he was like, "How many Torahs do you have?" He said, "We got two. We got the oral Torah, we got the written Torah." And he says, "I only want to learn the written Torah." So next day, Gentile went to school. Rabbi Hillel said, "Okay." Next day, Gentile went to school, and he started teaching them the alphabet from Aleph to the whole Hebrew alphabet. And then through the process of time, he kept teaching them the alphabet. And the Gentile was like, "Hey, man, why is he just only teaching me the alphabet?" And then Rabbi Hillel said, "Well, you ain't going to be able to understand anything else without the oral Torah." So that shows us that when a Gentile wanted to study under these rabbis of the time of Jesus, Rabbi Hillel was a contemporary with Jesus. What that shows us is that there was the oral Torah that the Gentile had to accept, and the written Torah. Now, the oral Torah had a whole bunch of stuff in it with the divers washings before you eat, and all of these layers and layers and layers of halakhic instructions. And it was a big deal. You know what I'm saying? It was a really, really big deal. And Jesus, Yeshua, throughout his ministry, he actually went against the oral Torah a lot. He spoke against it a lot. So when it came down to the conversion process, the rabbinical conversion process of Gentiles, like how does a Gentile become a Jew? That was mapped out already. You know what I'm saying? There was rabbis that had that mapped out already. Like, okay, if a Gentile wants to become a Jew, he has to accept the oral Torah, he has to accept the written Torah, he has to study both, and then he has to go before the Beit Din, which is like a council, and then it's like a pop quiz. They drill him. I'm getting distracted because my kid's coming in, but they start drilling him to see if he's qualified to get circumcised. And then if he is qualified to get circumcised, he'll get circumcised. And then he goes through the Tevilah process, which is what we would refer to as baptism. Okay. So for the Gentile, it was so much harder for that Gentile to become Jewish. Why did that Gentile want to become Jewish? Because the Abrahamic covenant. So the prevailing theology of the first century was that they had to be a Jew to be saved. I'm not saying that's accurate. I'm saying that was the prevailing theology in the first century, was that the Jews were saved. So the Jews actually, their mindset was this. It was almost like salvation by election. Since they was born Jew, they was born into salvation. So when as Westerners, we're over here thinking, oh, the Jews think they have to work the Torah and they have to keep the 613 commandments to be saved. The Jews don't think that. They didn't think that then. They don't think that now. They think since they were born into covenant that they have a place in the life to come. What they do have to do in regards to Torah is not do a sin that would get them cut off from their people.
Yeah.
You tracking? All right, because if they got cut off from that nation, guess what? That salvation went with it. Okay,
Yeah.
so but they were born into it, but the Gentile wasn't born into it. So if the Gentile believed in Hashem, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then that Gentile would have to go through the conversion process, aka circumcision, in order to be part of that nation of Israel. And it makes a little bit of sense because if you think about it, the covenants are national covenants. We can go, even the new covenant, we can go to Jeremiah 31 through 34. We can go to Ezekiel 36, 26, and 27. And God says, I'm going to make a new covenant with who? The house of Israel and the house of Judah, right? But
Yeah.
we see as Paul exegetes in Galatians chapter 3 that by the faith of Abraham, we're also counted as the seed of Abraham. And we see from Romans chapter 11 how man, it's been 36 minutes already. Romans chapter 11, how we're grafted in. As Gentiles, we're grafted in.
Yeah.
So I gave all that context and I labored to get here. Paul had to combat circumcision so much. Now, the whole process of circumcision, he had to combat that so much because believing Jews that still had that halakhic mindset. And when I say believing Jews, I mean Jews that received Yeshua as the Messiah. They still had halakha. They still had that halakhic mindset, which is not written Torah. They was telling these Gentiles like, oh yeah, like Galatians is the best example. Eden, stop. So Galatians is the best example how Paul mentions another gospel. Paul mentions another Jesus. Okay, so these believers wasn't no non-believers preaching Jesus. You know what I'm saying? These believer Jews that believed Jesus was the Messiah. The other gospel was, yeah, he's the Messiah, but he's the Messiah for the Jewish people. And if you want to benefit from his messiahship, you got to become Jewish. And that's where that rabbinical circumcision comes into the picture. And then that's where Paul says, man, look, don't do that. If you get circumcised, you've fallen from grace because now you're trying to do something for salvation. Faith brings salvation. You don't have to go through this process to become Jewish to have salvation. You just got to believe. And then he teaches the truth of salvation through Torah by bringing up Abraham. He was like, look, man, what faith was imputed to Abraham. Righteousness was imputed to Abraham by faith. So he's literally teaching Torah in order to drive his point home. And he even goes on to say, he's like, man, for those that want to be under the law, now you brought up the word nomos. I like replacing nomos with Torah because a lot of times that's what is being discussed. But anyways, in the English, of course, is law. Paul was saying, for those of you that want to be under the law, have you not heard the law? And the reason he was saying that in the book of Galatians is because, like, the law teaches faith and that we're saved by faith. We're not saved by going through this halakhic rabbinical process in order to be a Jewish person, in order to be saved, in order for Jesus to be our Messiah. No, we're saved by faith in the Messiah. Now, it's the reaction to that salvation. The proper reaction to that salvation should cause you, according to Ezekiel 36, 26, and 27, and according to Jeremiah 31, and according to Romans chapter 8, it should cause you to want to be obedient to God as an expression of your love towards him.
They tried to tell me follow Jesus. It's hard to follow with this garbage that you teach us.